Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rink-Side with Hits and Clips. Well, in episode number 22, we are going to be recapping round two of the entire CHL. Round one has officially come to an end for all three leagues in the CHL, and then there are only 12 teams remaining, including the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies, the Rimouski Oceanic, the Shawinigan Cataracts, and the Moncton Wildcats of the QMJHL, the Barrie Colts, the Oshawa Generals, the London Knights, and the Kitchener Rangers of the OHL, and then the Portland Winterhawks, the Spokane Chiefs, the Medicine Hat Tigers, and the Lethbridge Hurricanes of the WHL. So let's get started. Well, if you're new to our channel, thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate you tuning into our videos as we cover all hockey leagues as best as we can, including NHL, CHL, which includes OHL, WHL, and QMJHL. We include the OJHL, the Ontario Junior Hockey League, the PJHL, the Provincial Junior Hockey League, the AHL, the American Hockey League, the NHL, as well as many more, and we hope to look to cover more leagues in the coming future. Well, we are now into round three, the semifinals, the Eastern and Western Conference Final Championships for all three leagues in the CHL, and I'm just going to recap of all the matchups of what happened in round two and some of the matchups that we should be looking forward to as we get closer to claiming each champion in each of these leagues. Well, similar to the first video in round one, I am going to recap first the OHL, then the QMJHL, and then the WHL just to finish things off as we did have our last spot that was clinched into the top 12 for round number three of all the CHL in the Western Hockey League last night. So we're going to start with round two of the OHL, and we're going to start in the Eastern Conference, and we're going to start with the matchup that it was between the Brantford Bulldogs and the Oshawa Generals. Well, on Thursday, April 10th, it was the Brantford Bulldogs who had home ice advantage as they clinched the top of the Eastern Conference of the OHL this season. And it was the Brantford Bulldogs who came on top of the Oshawa Generals 5-2 with a series 1-0 over Oshawa. Well, then we move on to Sunday, April 13th, and it was the Brantford Bulldogs who once again claimed a 2-0 series victory over Oshawa with an 8-5 win over the Generals. Well, we shift over to Oshawa now, and it's Oshawa with home advantage, and Oshawa's looking to get back in this series. And well, on Tuesday, April 15th, the Generals just crushed the Bulldogs, winning that game 7-2, with the series being now 2-1 in favor of Brantford. Well, then we move on to Thursday, April 17th, and it was a close game. It wasn't as much of a high scoring game as I think a lot of us thought it was going to be, considering the past three games were just blowouts and a goal scoring festival. Oshawa, they ended up coming out with a 4-2 victory over Brantford, and that ends up tying the series at 2, which shifts over back to Brantford for game number 5. Well, on Saturday, April 19th, we shift back to Brantford at the Brantford Civic Center, with Brantford having home ice. The series is tied 2-2, and one of these teams will have a chance at eliminating their opponent in the next game of number 6. Well, it was the Oshawa Generals who came out on top, winning their first game on the road in Brantford in this series with a final score of 3-2, and at this point Oshawa does have a 3-2 lead going back to Oshawa, and at this point it's going to be a very tough game for Brantford. They're playing on the road, they're down in the series, and they're trying to keep their season alive. Well, we go out to Oshawa for game number 6 on Sunday, April 20th, and it was the Oshawa Generals who came out on top, winning the game 4-1, winning the series 4-2, and eliminating the Brantford Bulldogs from playoff contention. And the Oshawa Generals are on their way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they will await the matchup of the Barrie and Kingston series. Well, speaking of that Barrie and Kingston series, that's the next series we are going to cover, as it was the Barrie Colts who ended up coming out on top over the Kingston Frontenacs in 7 games, defeating the Frontenacs, winning the series 4-3. Well, game 1 happened in Barry having home ice advantage, and it was the Barry Colts who came out on top on Thursday, April 10th, defeating the Kingston Frontenacs with a final score of 6-2. Well, we moved to Saturday, April 12th. Barry still having home ice advantage. They have a 1-0 series lead, and Barry again claiming that 2-0 series lead as they defeated Kingston 7-4, taking a 2-0 series lead out to Kingston, and Kingston having home ice advantage. Great coverage by the broadcast team in both Barrie and Kingston, by the way. I just want to mention too that I love the broadcasts that have been happening on your TV specifically for Kojiko. Great call by the team out in Barrie as they had the call on Rogers TV for this series as well. And as we shift out to Kingston, it is the Kingston Frontenacs who pull away with a 5-3 victory in game number 3 on Tuesday, April 15th. And at this point, the Barrie Colts lead the series 2-1. Well, then on Thursday, April 17th, once again, the home ice advantage is in favor of Kingston, and it is the Frontenacs who defeat the Barrie Colts once again on home ice, winning this game 9-4, and at this point the series is tied 2-2. We moved to Barrie on Saturday, April 19th, and well, this game needed overtime as it was the Barrie Colts who came out on top on home ice 2-1, defeating the Frontenacs in overtime and taking a 3-2 series lead where they can close out this series and move on to the Eastern Conference Finals in Game 6. Well, on Sunday, April 20th, this was a very close game, and this also needed to decide in overtime as the Kingston Frontenacs came out with a 3-2 victory over the Barrie Colts, winning this game in overtime and sending this back to the Silent Arena in Barrie for game number 7. Unfortunately, I couldn't get this game on my TV box, but I was watching this game closely on the CHL app, and I was just hoping that Barrie could close the series out right in Game 6. But the Frontenacs pulled away with an overtime victory, and they send us to a deciding Game 7. Well, in Game 7 in Barrie, it's a 50-50 shot. You got a really strong and competitive Kingston Frontenacs team, where you have a very dominating Barrie Colts team as well, who's looking to move on to the Eastern Conference Finals. I can see both Barrie and Oshawa. I can see both Oshawa and Kingston. It's just, it could go anybody's way. If Kingston won the series, I was going to see if I get out to a game out in Kingston to see the Gens play the Frontenacs out in Kingston, but it was the Barrie Colts who came out on top with a 6-4 victory on Tuesday, April 22nd, eliminating the Kingston Frontenacs from playoff contention. They move on to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they will play the Oshawa Generals, and my two OHL teams are going head-to-head for that Eastern Conference title. And at this point, I'm just so excited. I know one of these teams are going to claim it. I love both of these teams. I'll be happy with whatever the result is. This is just going to be a fun, competitive series, and I can't wait to see how this one will unfold. Well, we're going to move on to the Western Conference for the OHL now, and as you would expect, a very successful, strong, competitive London Knights team, they end up sweeping their second consecutive series, not just over the Owen Sound Attack, but over the Erie Otters, who ended up defeating the former Memorial Cup champions, the Saginaw Spirit. And it was the London Knights who ended up coming out on top, winning the series 4-0, and they end up eliminating the Erie Otters from playoff contention. And at this point, it's all a Canadian race from this point, as we have only Canadian teams competing for the OHL title. Well, on Thursday, April 10th, in game number 1, it was the London Knights who came out on top of the Erie Otters at Canada Life Place in London, Ontario, as it was the London Knights who defeated Erie 6-3 in game 1. They take a 1-0 series lead. We go to game 2 in London, and on Saturday, April 12th, it was the London Knights who just crushed the Erie Otters 7-2, and at this point, they take a 2-0 series lead, heading over to Erie, Pennsylvania. Well, then on Tuesday, April 15th, and we are at the Erie Insurance Arena, with Erie having home advantage, and at this point, you just have to hope that Erie can just pull off some kind of home comeback. You're playing in front of your home fans. You just got to try and find some kind of momentum that's going to really shift in your favor over a very strong London Knights team. I was even saying, I think the London Knights could honestly defeat an AHL team. That's how strong and competitive this London Knights team is overall. And so, as a result, on Tuesday, April 15th, the London Knights get the shutout in Erie and they take a commanding 3-0 series lead going into game number 4. And at this point, the Erie Otters season is on the line. Well, we go to game number 4, and I was actually watching this game live, and this was a very interesting game as well. I was watching a couple other games at the same time too, but this one I was keeping my close eye on because the London Knights have a chance to move on to the Western Conference Finals. They'll play either Windsor or Kitchener at this point. And on Thursday, April 17th, the London Knights pulled out an overtime victory 4-3. But it wasn't just the first time they won in overtime, it was the second time. And I'm going to explain what actually happened here. So, in overtime, the London Knights and the Erie Otters are playing, and I can't remember exactly what the call was. It may have been goaltender interference, but the London Knights, they scored, they're cheering, they're celebrating. The Erie Otters, the players are in tears. A lot of these players, their OHL careers have come to an end, and you just gotta hope that the Erie Otters have some kind of momentum that can shift in their favor if this goal is called back. The refs are discussing, they're on the tablets. Is this goal good? Is it not? Surprisingly, this ended up getting called back. And well, the Erie Otters, they got to try and find some kind of momentum. All their players are just in disbelief. They have a second chance at this, the second chance to keep their season alive. So they get the play going underway, maybe about 5 or 6 minutes later. London Knights, they score again. I honestly wasn't surprised. I knew London was going to win this regardless. Even if this did go to a game 5, I knew regardless London was going to come out with this series victory. But it was the second time London scored in overtime, and that is just a heartbreak for the Erie Otters. Not just to get swept by London in the second round after a very competitive series with Saginaw, but just to go out in overtime twice in a heartbreak. I feel sorry for the Erie Otters, but credit to the team that they put up a dominant effort. They just did everything in their strength and power to stay in this series against a very strong London team. You knew London was going to bring what they brought to Owen Sound and over the past seasons. I think the London Knights even only lost 9 or 11 games. You just have to credit the Erie Otters for such a tremendous effort, and they just put up everything they had, and they ended up getting swept by London. So the London Knights move on to the Western Conference Finals, awaiting the opponent of Windsor or Kitchener. Well, this was a very interesting series to watch as well, because this must have been only the sixth time in OHL history where a team had a commanding 3-0 series lead and just put it all on the line and ended up losing the series in 7 games. Well, that's what happened to the Windsor Spitfires in this second round matchup versus the Kitchener Rangers. I call them the Waterloo Warriors. I really think they need to rebrand that. Just putting that out there. I think they need to rebrand to Waterloo Warriors. But anyhow, I know that Kitchener has a great history going back to the Rangers. But getting back to this in particular series, on Thursday, April 10th, it was the Windsor Spitfires who came out on top with a 5-1 victory over the Rangers, taking a commanding 1-0 series lead. We go to Saturday, April 12th. This also being in Windsor at the WFCU Center, and it was the Windsor Spitfires who came out with another 5-1 victory, and they take a 2-0 series lead. So back-to-back games, you have a 2-0 series lead, and they're both 5-1 victories, and you're going to the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. If all goes well in Game 3, you have a chance to close this out in Game 4, and that's what I was hoping for with the Windsor Spitfires, but let's just see how this unfolded. So on Monday, April 14th, in Kitchener, the Windsor Spitfires ended up defeating Kitchener 6-3, and they have a 3-0 series lead. This is all on the line for Kitchener. They gave their effort. Windsor, I was expecting a little bit more from you. Well, we go to Wednesday, April 16th. Kitchener, they shut out Windsor. Not sure how they got a shutout, but credit to Kitchener. The series is 3-1 Windsor. We go to Game 5, Friday, April 18th, and Kitchener, they pull out a 5-2 victory. Well, at this point, you just got to wonder, okay, you got to be a little bit concerned here. Kitchener just won their second game, and this is going to a Game 6. You had a 3-0 commanding series. I was expecting a Windsor-London series. But let's see how this unfolded in game six. Well, we go to Sunday, April 20th, and it was the Kitchener Rangers who blow out Windsor for nothing. And you just got to think this is not the Windsor Spitfire team we just saw 2, 3 games ago. This is the team that needs to approach what they've got themselves into, and they got to quickly fix what they started. Well, we go to game seven, Tuesday, April 22nd. It's in Windsor. They got home advantage. Maybe this will be a close game. Maybe this goes to overtime. Great. Well, it did go to overtime. And the Kitchener Rangers, they pulled out a 2-1 overtime victory, eliminating the Windsor Spitfires from playoff contention. The Windsor Spitfires were in full control in this series, but what a comeback by the Kitchener Rangers. Full credit to them. And I believe this was the sixth time in CHL history where a team has come back down 3-0 to defeat their opponents and win the series in 7 games, 4-3. Well, we have our matchups for our East and Western Conference Finals in the OHL. It will be the Oshawa Generals and the Barrie Colts. And then in the Western Conference, we'll have the Kitchener Rangers taking on the very competitive and dominant London Knights. Well, the schedule is not currently updated on my tablet here for the CHL website, but I will give you the schedule for both the East and West Conference Finals series. So we're going to start with the Barrie Colts and the Oshawa Generals. So Barrie will have home ice advantage. Friday, April 25th at 7:30 p.m., Game 1 will take place at the Southland Arena in Barrie. And on Sunday, April 27th at 6 p.m., it will also be in Barrie for game number 2. We shift to Oshawa for game number 3, and on Tuesday, April 29th at 7:05, that's when game 3 will take place at the Tribute Community Center, and on Thursday, May 1st at 7:05, that will be the time and the date for game number 4. If necessary, game 5 will be taking place on Saturday, May 3rd at 7:30. Game 6 will take place Monday, May 5th at 7:05 p.m. and Tuesday, May 6th, if necessary, 7 p.m. for Game 7 back at the Southland Arena in Barrie. So that is the schedule matchup for the Barrie Colts and Oshawa Generals Eastern Conference Finals Series. Okay, in terms of the Western Conference Final Series between Kitchener and London, Game 1 will take place on Friday, April 25th at 7 o'clock, and that will take place in London. Game 2 happening in London at 4 p.m., and this will be on Sunday, April 27th. Game 3 and 4 will shift over to Kitchener at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium, and Game 3 will take place at 7 p.m. on Monday, April 28th, and then Game 4 at 7 o'clock p.m. Wednesday, April 30th. That will be the time and the date for game number 4. If necessary, Game 5 will take place in London at 7 o'clock p.m. on Friday, May 2nd, and Game 6 will take place on Sunday, May 4th. However, the time is to be determined, so there's no official time for Game 6 if needed for that London Kitchener series as of right now. But Game 7 at 7 p.m. on Monday, May 5th, that is when Game 7 will happen back in London. Obviously, these are if necessary. So these are the overall results and recaps for the OHL Round 2 and what's to come for the Eastern and Western Conference Finals of the OHL. Okay, we're going to switch over to the QMJHL now, as it was the Moncton Wildcats who took on the Baie-Comeau Drakkar. And it was the Moncton Wildcats who came on top of this series, defeating Baie-Comeau with a series final of 4-1. Well, in game number 1 on April 11th, it was the Moncton Wildcats who put up a very dominant effort, defeating Baie-Comeau in Moncton 7-0. And so now, at this point, Moncton has a 1-0 series lead. We go to game number 2, and it is the Moncton Wildcats who pull out a 4-1 victory over Baie-Comeau. And we are heading over to Baie-Comeau for the next 3 games, as Moncton has a 2-0 series lead. On game number 3 in Baie-Comeau, it was the Drakkar who came out with a 5-2 victory, and they make the series 2-1 in favor of Moncton at this point. Game 4 will need double overtime, but it goes in Moncton's favor as they win 4-3 in double overtime. I was actually watching this game. I was watching this random QMJHL game came up, and it was Moncton Baie-Comeau. I was like, oh, great, but maybe this is just a repeat from either game 1, 2, or 3. I looked at the schedule, and they're currently in double overtime. I look on my TV, it's double overtime. This is the game that's happening live. So Moncton pulls out a 4-0 victory over Baie-Comeau, and they take a 3-0 series lead. And game 5 will take place in Baie-Comeau. Well, on April 18th, it was the Moncton Wildcats who came out with a very close one-goal win, 5-4, defeating Baie-Comeau, eliminating them from playoff contention, and they will play in the Eastern Conference Final, waiting for their matchup either between the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies or the Halifax Mooseheads. Well, in terms of that Rouyn-Noranda and Halifax series, well, it was the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies who did defeat the Halifax Mooseheads, unfortunately on my end, as they ended up sweeping the Mooseheads, and they will now play Moncton in the Eastern Conference Finals. Well, let's just see how that Rouyn-Noranda and Halifax game turned out. Well, in game 1 on April 11th, it was Rouyn-Noranda who defeated Halifax 4-1. We play game 2 in Rouyn-Noranda, and on April 12th, Rouyn-Noranda, they shut out Halifax, win that game 5-0, and they have a 2-0 series lead. Well, we shift back to Halifax for the next 2 games, and on April 15th, it was Rouyn-Noranda who came out with a 4-1 victory, and then they could close it out, which they did in game 4, winning that game 5-1. Unfortunately, my QMJHL Halifax Mooseheads have been eliminated from playoff contention, and the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies are on their way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they will play the Moncton Wildcats. Well, how did the Western Conference series turn out? Well, it was the Rimouski Oceanic who defeated the Chicoutimi Saguenayes, and they won that series 4-2. So in game 1 on April 11th, it was the Rimouski Oceanic who defeated Chicoutimi 5-2, taking a 1-0 series lead. Rimouski takes a 3-2 victory in overtime in game number 2 as they win that game, and they end up taking a 2-0 series lead out to Chicoutimi. Well, on April 15th, it was the Chicoutimi Saguenayes who ended up shutting out Rimouski, and they are back in the series. They make it 2-1 for Rimouski. Then we go to game 4, and we needed another overtime, and this time it goes in favor of Chicoutimi again, as they make it a 2-2 series as they win that game 3-2 in overtime. Well, in game number 5, it was the Rimouski Oceanic who defeated the Saguenayes by a 1-goal victory as they won that game 3-2, and they take a 3-2 series lead where they can close out Chicoutimi in game 5, and that's exactly what they did as they defeated Chicoutimi, winning that series 4-2, winning the game 4-1, and they eliminate Chicoutimi, and they are off to the Western Conference Finals. And then last but not least, it was the Shawinigan Cataracts who swept the Sherbrooke Phoenix 4-0 as they will move on to the Western Conference Final. And it was the Shawinigan Cataracts who defeated Sherbrooke 5-4 in game number 1 on April 11th. April 12th, the next day, it was Shawinigan who defeated Sherbrooke again, but this time it was a 5-2 victory. Game 3, we shift to Sherbrooke, and it was Shawinigan who came out with a 5-2 victory again, but this time on the road. And then in game number 4, to close it out, it was the Shawinigan Cataracts who eliminate Sherbrooke in overtime, winning that game 3-2, and the Sherbrooke Phoenix are on their way to the next round. Well, we have our semifinal matchups now for the QMJHL. It will be the Moncton Wildcats versus the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies. In terms of that series, game 1 will take place on April 24th, home ice to Moncton. Game 2 will happen the next day on April 25th in Moncton. Game 3 will take place in Rimouski, and that will take place on April 29th. And the next day on April 30th, Game 4 will take place in Rimouski. Game 5, if necessary, it will take place on May 2nd in Moncton. Game 6 will take place in Rimouski if needed on May 4th. And then if needed, a Game 7 will take place in that series on May 6th, back in Moncton for a Game 7. So that is a look at the overall results for the QMJHL and the 2 semifinal matchups to come for the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League. If you haven't been watching any of the games on Victory Plus, all of the Western Hockey League games are available to stream free if you would like to watch any of the upcoming games in the Western Hockey League. Well, we're going to start with the Medicine Hat Tigers and the Prince Albert Raiders series that took place in the first Eastern Conference matchup, as it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who defeated the Prince Albert Raiders 4-0, winning that series. I was actually really glad to see this. I was really stoked about this because, I mean, I love Prince Albert and everything. It was unfortunate to see Edmonton go down in 7 games to Prince Albert. So I wanted Prince Albert out, and I loved to see Medicine Hat win both of their series over the two Saskatchewan teams. So it was Medicine Hat who came out on top in this series. So let's see how this series ended up turning out. So in game one on Saturday, April 12th, it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who came out on top 6-4 with a 1-0 commanding series lead. We moved to game two the next day on Sunday, April 13th, and it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who defeated the Prince Albert Raiders 5-4 in overtime. Now, if you caught my latest reviewing CHL cards, you would have heard me mention that Gavin McKenna of the Medicine Hat Tigers in this particular game pulled off a Michigan, and it was just the most unreal thing I saw from the Medicine Hat Tigers overall in this playoff series. So congratulations to Gavin McKenna, congratulations to the Medicine Hat Tigers, and at this point they take a 2-0 series lead out to Prince Albert. Well, on Wednesday, April 16th, it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who took full control on the road, defeating Prince Albert 6-1, and they have a 3-0 commanding series lead, and they can close it out in game number 4. Well, in game number 4 on Thursday, April 17th, it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who shut out the Prince Albert Raiders 3-0, eliminating them from playoff contention, and the Medicine Hat Tigers are on their way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they will either take on the Lethbridge Hurricanes or the Calgary Hitmen. Well, that's the next series we are going to uncover right now, as that was the last game of round 2 that happened just last night. It was the Lethbridge Hurricanes who came out on top of the Calgary Hitmen and winning that series in 7 games, 4-3. Well, let's recap and see how this series unfolded. Well, in game number 1 on Thursday, April 10th, it was the Lethbridge Hurricanes who defeated Calgary 4-0 with a shutout, and they take a 1-0 series lead. On Saturday, April 12th, back in Calgary again, it was the Lethbridge Hurricanes who defeated Calgary 2-1, and they take a 2-0 series lead back to Lethbridge. Well, on Tuesday, April 15th, it was the Calgary Hitmen this time who came out with a 5-3 victory, and they make the series 2-1 at this point. And then on Wednesday, April 16th, Calgary, they win in overtime in Lethbridge, and they win that game 3-2. And at this point, the series is tied at 2. So Lethbridge winning both of their first 2 games in Calgary, and Calgary winning both of their first 2 games of this series in Lethbridge. So we've got a series, and now we go to game number 5. Back in Calgary, and it is once again the Calgary Hitmen pulling out another overtime victory 6-5, and they take a 3-2 series lead at this point. We go to game number 6, and well, Lethbridge's season is all on the line. They got to win this game, and they got to do it in front of their home fans. Well, on Saturday, April 19th, it was the Lethbridge Hurricanes who came out with a commanding 5-1 victory over Calgary. They force a Game 7 back at the Scotiabank Saddledome in Calgary, and you can expect that this next game is going to be full of Lethbridge and Calgary fans. Well, we go to Wednesday, April 23rd, yesterday, for game number 7 in Calgary, and it was the Lethbridge Hurricanes who pulled out a 3-1 victory over Calgary. They win this series 4-3, eliminating the Calgary Hitmen from playoff contention, and you will officially now have the Medicine Hat Tigers and the Lethbridge Hurricanes in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I was just really hoping that Calgary would get eliminated at this point. I'm sorry, Calgary. I just wanted you guys out. As an Edmonton Oilers and Oil Kings fan, I wanted your team out, and I was happy to see Lethbridge take on Medicine Hat. We are going to have a Battle of Alberta, though, as it will be Medicine Hat versus Lethbridge. Well, we are going to move on to the Western Conference matchups now, as it was the Everett Silvertips taking on the Portland Winterhawks. And this was a really interesting series to watch, too, because I was really hoping that Everett would win this series, as they ended up eliminating Seattle, where Portland, they eliminated Prince George, who I was rooting for. So I wanted Portland out, and, well, unfortunately on my end, it was Portland who came out on top with a 4-3 series victory. Well, let's just break this series down. It was Everett winning both of their games in Everett and winning the first two games. Well, in game one on Friday, April 11th, Everett defeated Portland 3-2 in overtime. They take a 1-0 series lead. The next day on Saturday, April 12th, Everett wins yet again in overtime, winning that game 4-3. We shift over to Portland now for game 3 and 4, and it was the Portland Winterhawks who came out with a 3-1 victory on Tuesday, April 15th, making the series 2-1 in favor of Everett. Then on Wednesday, April 16th, in game number 4, Portland wins again, yet in overtime. They win that game 6-5. Well, then we shift over to Everett again on Friday, April 18th, and Portland, they once again win their game 4-3, and Portland has now won 3 straight games over Everett, and they will now play for game 6. Well, on Saturday, April 19th, it all comes down to the line. Everett's got to win their game, but their season is over, and that's exactly what they did. Everett came out on top over Portland on the road, and they win that game 8-4. Well, we now go to a game 7 on Tuesday, April 22nd. Portland and Everett, the two teams, two big rivals, and one of these teams need to pull it out or else their season is over. Well, it was Portland who came out on top, winning that game 4-2. They win game 7, and Portland will move on to the Western Conference Finals, and that will eliminate the Everett Silvertips, ending their season. And then the final series to cover for the Western Conference and the WHL, it was the Spokane Chiefs taking on the Victoria Royals. The Victoria Royals, the last BC division in the playoff contention race. And they're hoping to get past Spokane and hopefully take on Portland at this point. Well, on Sunday, April 13th, for game number 1, it was the Spokane Chiefs who defeated Victoria 4-3 in double overtime. So obviously I'm rooting for Victoria. I wasn't thrilled about this. I've been watching every single one of these games. Even if they went to double overtime, I've been watching them all. So at this point, Spokane has a 1-0 series lead. Monday, April 14th, Victoria comes out strong, winning that game 5-1. They tie the series at 1 apiece. Wednesday, April 16th, Victoria comes out again 4-3, and that was in regulation. And at this point, Victoria, they're going to take their series lead 2-1. Well, Friday, April 18th, for game number 4, it was the Spokane Chiefs who came out strong over the Victoria Royals 9-6 in Victoria. For game number 5, the Spokane Chiefs come out big, defeating Victoria 9-6, and they tie the series 2-2. Well, Saturday, April 19th, the Spokane Chiefs defeat the Victoria Royals yet again, but it comes in overtime. Well, Victoria and Spokane just keep going back and forth between who's going to take the series lead, and Spokane takes their series lead back. So they win that game 5-4 in overtime, and they take the series 3-2 at this point. Victoria's season's on the line. They gotta win this game. I have to say, before I recap game 6 here, this entire series, it just seemed like they just weren't finding their groove. Like, you knew they were giving it their all. Game 6, they just seemed to be taking a lot of penalties. They turned the puck over a lot. They just weren't finding their shape. I don't know how they ended up making it out to double overtime in game 6, but credit to Spokane. I honestly have to say, as a Victoria Royals fan who was rooting for them all the way in this series, Spokane actually deserved to win this game. Victoria, I mean, they gave it their all. Just the overall performance by the entire team. There's a lot of overagers who are finishing off their WHL careers, and they just had a phenomenal, outstanding season in playoff race themselves. But Spokane, they come out on top 5-4 in double overtime for game number 6, and they will eliminate Victoria, and they will move on to the Western Conference Finals versus the Portland Winterhawks. So there are your final 4 matchups for round 2, and your final 4 competitors as they will go on to the Conference Championship Finals. So this series isn't updated on my tablet either for the Conference Championship for the Eastern Conference because Lethbridge just won last night. However, it appears that the schedule was just released on social media. So the schedule for the Medicine Hat and Lethbridge series, well, Medicine Hat, they're going to have home ice advantage, obviously. And on Friday, April 25th at 7 p.m., Game 1 will be in Medicine Hat. Game 2 in Medicine Hat on Saturday, April 26th at 7 p.m. Then we're going to shift back to Lethbridge for Game 3 and 4. And those games will take place Tuesday, April 29th at 7 p.m. for Game 3. and Wednesday, April 30th at 7 p.m. for Game 4. If necessary, a Game 5 will take place back in Medicine Hat on Friday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Game 6 in Lethbridge on Saturday, May 3rd at 7 p.m. And then obviously, if necessary, back in Medicine Hat for a Game 7 at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, May 6th. So that is the Eastern Conference Final Championship Series schedule for Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. And then in terms of the Western Conference Series Championship Series between Spokane and Portland, well, Spokane, they're going to have home ice advantage to start the first two games off. On Friday, April 25th, with Spokane having home ice advantage for the first two games, at 7 p.m., Game 1 will take place. Game 2 on Sunday, April 27th. This game will be at 5:05 p.m. And then we're going to shift over to Portland for Games 3, 4, and 5. Game 3 taking place at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, April 30th. Thursday, May 1st at 7 p.m. for Game 4. And Saturday, May 3rd at 6 p.m. for game number 5 if necessary. Game 6 and 7 will take place back in Spokane. Game 6 taking place on Monday, May 5th at 7:05 p.m. And then if necessary, obviously, Tuesday, May 6th at 7:05 p.m. Game 7 will take place in Spokane. So that is a recap for the overall series of round 2 and the upcoming championship conference finals for each of the leagues in the CHL. Who are you looking forward to seeing this coming conference finals series? And who are you hoping that wins the championship overall? Who's going to play in the Memorial Cup this year? We're going to have to see what takes place. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this video. Really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our latest videos, our Spotify for all of our latest podcast episodes, as well as on Bluesky for all of our latest up-to-date notifications. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.